Alright, so good morning or evening, whatever time it is for you. I'm Harshal, and today we're going to talk about how some smart nutrition and feeding strategies could seriously increase ruminant production. So, why are we even talking about ruminant production? Well, there's a few reasons, and the biggest being the 2050 problem, like we've all heard in our classes or wherever. And basically, 2050 problem talks about how by 2050, there's going to be about 9.7 billion people on Earth, and we are going to need to feed all these people. So the question that comes up is how are we, what are we going to use to feed these people? And one of the ways we are doing it now, and we will do it then, is using ruminants, because ruminants take human inedible products and they make it into high quality food on non-arable land. And so all this non-arable land can't even be used for plant only systems, because first of all, crops don't grow on this land, and second of all, plant only systems don't really meet all the nutritional requirements of humans. So the meat industry will stick around. And in addition to that, all of the technologies and practices that could increase sustainable production are available right now, but they need to be adopted globally. So that's the question that I want to answer with nutrition. So before we even start thinking about how we're going to produce for the future, we need to start by looking at what the current industry looks like. So in the US, cattle operations are dominated by small scale producers. And small scale producers means less than 1,000 head, in my opinion, here. But at the same time, the U.S. cattle and calf inventory is dominated by large scale producers that have over 1,000 head of cattle. So basically, there's still a large amount of cattle owned by small scale producers, and that doesn't even take into consideration all the producers outside of the U.S. So the small scale producers in the U.S. and outside of the U.S., they don't get all these advancements and technologies like the large scale producers do. And so you may ask yourself why. And a lot of the reasons are because there's simply just reduced availability to information, expensive practices, or the farmers think there's a perceived non-applicability to the farm. So what now? How do we solve this? What should we do? Well, there's many things that are being done already, but I think that one way is to gain some real global efficient productivity from rural producers. There's a lot of area for growth in that spot. As you can see here in this picture, if you look at, so if beef are orange, you can see where a lot of beef are made, and that would be North America and South America and a little bit in Europe, but the main things that are being grown in rural areas, or really all over the world, is chicken, but specifically in East Asia and South Asia and Africa, you can see chicken are dominating, while beef are produce at very very low rates. And so these areas have a lot of area for growth for cattle, especially knowing that cattle are very adaptable and hardy animals that could really make use of these rural areas. So the question now would be, how are we going to increase productivity in these rural areas? And one really simple, very effective way would be through nutrition. Some of the most prominent losses in production can be lessened by high quality nutrition. These losses include heat increment, enteric methane production, and nitrogen loss. So to achieve higher adoption rates by rural producers, these technologies should be easy to adopt. There should be easy nutritional feeding strategies or easy nutritional information on whether I should use high quality forage or low quality forage, or if I should be meeting the animal's requirements at all times. And you can see in this figure that methane is about a 6 to 12% energy loss. Some people have said 4 to 12, and always, heat increment, metabolic heat production, manure, that's just straight up nitrogen loss, urine, also nitrogen loss. So let's talk about the losses and what we could do to remedy them. First of all, there's the methane loss, which accounts for about 4 to 12% of gross energy loss. And what we could do is use high quality forage that has been shown to reduce the amount of gross energy loss as methane. Although this isn't necessarily the cheapest, most affordable way to increase production, it is still a useful one that producers across the globe do use, and it should be known by everyone. But the next one we have is a little bit more affordable and more sustainable for rural producers, and that is the remedy for nitrogen loss. And one simple way to simply reduce nitrogen loss is simply just reduce the amount of nitrogen they're taking in, which is protein. So you would simply reduce the protein in the diet. And the way we know this is because nitrogen excretion can vary quite considerably in response to the different levels of nitrogen intake. This means that it can be manipulated to reduce the nitrogen excretion, and consequently it would increase the nitrogen uptake of the ruminant. So there's a few different ways we could change the nitrogen intake for the ruminant, and that is by using non-protein nitrogens, or we could just simply match the protein requirement with the physiological status of the animal. And both of these could be very, very well used in rural areas, although matching the protein supplement with the physiological status of the animal would be much more useful, because they could constantly optimize based on whether it's super cold or super hot, or if their cows are pregnant, or if they're at peak lactation and such. So another way would be to use additives. These are very wide-ranging, and a lot of their effects are very similar, though. So their mechanism of action includes some altering of the microbial population and their associated pathways directly in the rumen. And these would be a little bit less useful in developing countries due to their specificity of use and cost, but they're important to mention because they have been proven to work. And so one of the ones that have been used for a long time are ionophores. And these reduce methane production, they reduce lactic acid production, they reduce nitrogen excretion, but they still increase propionate absorption. And these are all things that increase productivity. And so I mentioned that these additives are less useful, but one of the ones that could be more useful in rural areas are yeast, and it is more available worldwide and has proven to increase total volatile fatty acids, stabilize ruminal pH, and increase dry matter intake, which are all also very useful. And it's important to mention that there still needs to be a lot of research done in this area, and there's a whole lot to be learned in this area as well. So one of the best ways probably for rural areas is simply implementing smart feeding strategies. And this area has a lot less to do with buying a higher quality product or spending money for something, and has more to do with just simply doing smart optimizations and savings where applicable. So as you can see, one of the best ways to increase your quantity and quality of hay or forage you're feeding is by storing it correctly. There are a lot of ways you could store it correctly, and if you're in a rural setting, you could just do a few of these, and that should help. Or you could do more of these if you have the means for it. So one way is to store them above the ground, so they have ventilation that would reduce moisture, reduce mold susceptibility to mold growth. Or as they show you in here, you could store them with the round section facing the sun for the longest amount of time, so it can stay dry. So in conclusion, there are many advances out there that can help to make ruminant production more efficient, but they just need to be used, and globally. And it is also important to note that management practices must always be on par with any of these new technologies that are being implemented, because if you aren't doing the right thing on a management basis, then all of the things that you're implementing won't have an effect.